Australian coffee is made on the highest quality equipment by the most highly skilled and trained baristas in the world. We got people, like from other countries who are trying to export Australian style coffee because it is seen as a luxury. It's seen as being the best.
Hey everybody, you're with Dani Valent and you're listening to Dirty Linen. Dirty Linen runs on a few things. It runs on ideas, it runs on interesting people, it runs on a bit of tech, but it definitely runs on coffee. No podcast gets recorded without a coffee or two. And I think coffee is always an interesting topic to talk about. Another thing that we love on Dirty Linen is return guests. Now, I was going back through the archives and looking to find out when Sam Keck was last on the podcast. It was 2022, which is a bit of a while ago, so it is definitely over time to bring Sam back. Sam is one of the co-founders of Commonfolk, a group of cafes in Victoria, also roasting and importing coffee, and has an incredible social enterprise to what they do. Sam, welcome back to Dirty Linen.
Thank you so much for having me, and I'm glad to be back.
It's great to have you back and always good to talk to you. Now, we are talking in the light of an article that I really don't want to mention, but it's this sort of elephant that's not in the corner of the room, it's outside the room. It's been kicked out, but it was a very, I'm just going to say it, an obnoxious and inaccurate opinion piece that was published in the paper that I write a lot for. So I have many misgivings about it. Have to say the food team at The Age Good Food had nothing to do with this article. And it's, I don't want anyone to go and click on it because we don't want to give them any, we don't want to vindicate it. But what it did do was raise some points that it's always good to talk about in terms of coffee, about sourcing, about price, about quality, about considerations that perhaps we should, things we should have in mind as we have our daily cup. And Sam, I know you think about all these things as well. So first of all, I'd like to start with perhaps the impact of a piece that kicks the Australian coffee industry. What does that feel like, and what kind of impact can it have?
Yeah, I've been chatting about this with my colleagues and industry contemporaries because I feel like the Australian mainstream media, they love a good coffee story. I think it's sort of like the canary in the coal mine for all kind of economic sort of goings on. Like in Australia, it's like, oh, let's write a coffee piece. So, although I think the article, that shall not be named, did feel a little bit clickbaity, my perspective is, well, you got to fight fire with fire. So I think I'd written an entire rebuttal and sent it to you, Dani, in about half an hour. I was that fired up just because I think, although I don't think the coffee industry should be immune to kind of criticism, I think it's just got to be factual and it needs to be about real objective issues. And I think that this particular article was written by a political journo, and it was their subjective and, in my opinion, very uneducated perspective on something. And at the moment, Australian hospitality, and in particular coffee, is kind of in a pretty precarious position, and it just felt like a bit of a kick in the guts and unnecessary. But again, if we can then have conversations about it and maybe enlighten the coffee drinking public as to what's actually going on, maybe it's an opportunity. But yeah, I just thought it was a curious choice of article to publish. But I mean, again, it's certainly got eyes turned on from it. So, but yeah, hopefully we can fill the space with the actual facts about what's going on in coffee.
So, I mean, zooming out a little bit from coffee, Sam, why is it a challenging period for cafes in Australia at the moment?
Because everything is happening all at once. And that sounds like a bit of a broad sort of statement, but we've come out of COVID years, and I think that it's no longer necessarily an excuse for what's happening in the industry, but things never really got back to where they were. And almost immediately after the direct impacts of that were being felt, we experienced, I think, the Ukraine conflict, which had all sorts of impacts on supply chains. Everything remained high and expensive, and then we've seen kind of out of control inflation occur pretty much since then, but it's also seen sort of stagnant wage growth. And so you've kind of got this perfect storm of rising costs, on every level. And coffee is particularly unique there, but we can talk about that later. So your hospitality operators, it's now more expensive to fit out venues. Commercial leases are more expensive than ever. Wages have been rising at award wage level, minimum wage level every year, which I think is a good thing. But cost of goods have also been rising far beyond, I think, what customers are generally prepared to pay. And then our customers, who we love and obviously are nothing without, are also kind of feeling all of those constraints. They're also getting, higher petrol costs and higher supermarket costs. And it just means that the disposable income they've got is less, and their perception of good value is sort of no longer lining up with kind of the minimum price you need to charge for a lot of things that they want to consume. And it's sort of this perfect storm. And it means that operators are really trying to consolidate. And there's definitely ways to still make money. It just means that the landscape is changing so quickly that a lot of your mum and dad sort of operations that we've kind of built our industry on are finding it really bloody hard. And there's been I think I've started to see real consolidation in it. I think we've been seeing it in, say, the beer industry for a while. So many breweries and the like kind of going under because their eyes are bigger than their stomach. And now we're starting to see it, I think, in coffee and in restauranting as well. So it's kind of scary because I think we all agree that like Australia has the hospo scene unlike any other, but it's kind of at risk.
I've definitely noticed small, independent owner-operator businesses closing at a really devastating rate. Every closure has so much behind it, so much hope and hopes dashed, so many conversations, so much holding space for people to have their important moments, so much creativity and endeavour and intention. And when a business calls time on that, you just can only wonder about the heartbreak that lies underneath that, the ongoing financial burden, a lot of debt, potentially debt that's carried forward into the future, and just that feeling of I don't know if it feeling of failure perhaps, or feeling of things not working out the way you wanted, just the emotional burden on individuals, families and communities. It's not just numbers, is it?
Yeah. And I mean, one thing that I notice sometimes, and I'm not, like I try and kind of focus very much on the coffee side of things because I know that there's not a lot of arguments people could bring up that I wouldn't have an answer for in coffee. But, on a broader level and economic level, it's a bit harder, because I don't know everything. But I do, sometimes it really disheartens me when I see, there might be an Instagram post about a business closure, and it'll be a small independent that maybe I knew the owners or I knew of their business and who they were and them as human beings and their passion and love for hospitality and the products that they were producing in their community they were serving. And you see comments like, oh, well, if they couldn't afford to open, good, I'm glad they're closing down. Or, oh, well, get with the times, like business isn't for everyone. And, if it's, often it'd be drawn to wages. If you can't afford to pay your staff, then, you can't afford to be in business and a lot of these sort of things. And it kind of feels like maybe that Australian tall poppy mentality is kind of like now being pasted onto these, small independent businesses who every chance the owners weren't even paying themselves anyway. And I don't think it captures what's really going on. I think that that maybe what used to be the case where, you did have dodgy operators or people, who were, using their staff superannuation to fund their overseas holidays or whatever. That's not really happening like it possibly did 10, 15 years ago. Instead, you've just got people who are pouring their blood, sweat and tears into something. And every time it looks like it's about to work, another factor outside of their control comes in and cuts them off at the knees. And I know for a lot of these people, it's not any one thing that's the reason they're closing their business. It's just the mental wear and tear that has just finally, brought them to their knees and they just can't give any more. And if they can't give to the community they want to serve, they can't rock up, then they've got no choice but to kind of hand the keys back. I just worry that maybe we're missing the real essence of what's going on. And if we want to end up with large corporations running all of our hospitality businesses, That's kind of where we're heading. And even some of the potential legislation that the government's looking to bring in, I don't think that the intent of it is necessarily, to spite small businesses or these sort of small independents. But it's certainly easier to navigate through legislation change if you've got a team of lawyers and tax planners and accountants. Whereas like half the time, these small businesses that we sell coffee to go see their accountant once a year. And they're not really, agile enough to address this sort of stuff. And then next minute they're thinking, I've got to shut the doors. I just can't do it anymore.
Yeah, I really want the quirky individual places to survive and thrive. I don't want to walk down. I mean, I don't even want to go to every neighborhood and see a Commonfolk, Sam. I want the places that you have to travel for. I want the places where it's a very specific vision, and I want to live in a world that supports that. Okay, coffee. So, Sam, what do you want to rebut?
Well, all right. Let's start. We'll start from the top, and I'll start with focusing on Australia because I think one of the big claims was that our coffee's not very good, which I think on so many levels is wrong. So I'm happy to accept that the journalist in question doesn't like Australian coffee. That seems quite clear. I think that's interesting given that Australian coffee, even though, we have this reputation for being fantastic, is also incredibly diverse. We have cafes that serve a more traditional, darker roasted Italian style espresso, all the way through to super ultralight Scandi filter coffee. Like really, pick your poison. There's going to be someone kind of offering something you like. So my first thoughts is that said journalist just doesn't get out enough. But anyway, let's focus on specialty coffee because that's what Commonfolk likes to peddle. And I think that for me, that's where the future of Australian coffee should be putting its eggs into that basket, because I think it's where we stand a good chance to, retain our title of, world leaders. My first rebuttal was that we've produced 4 world barista champions over the course of that competition, more than any other country. Italy, which apparently, according to this journalist, is the yardstick of what coffee should be, has produced none. And I don't think that's by chance. I think that that's very much by design. Melbourne has pioneered specialty coffee, and it has spread all over Australia. And we're generally serving specialty grade, high quality, 80 plus, often sourced from smaller holder farms that are, doing a really good job of producing that coffee. I think, conflating, kind of fruity, fermented sort of anaerobic, strange coffee flavors as being bad, which I kind of get a sense is what the journalist is suggesting, is just his opinion. But I think that as a general rule, Australian coffee is made on the highest quality equipment by the most highly skilled and trained baristas in the world. We got people, from other countries who are trying to export Australian style coffee because it is seen as a luxury. It's seen as being the best. And their audience is also prepared to pay even more than we are for it. And they're coming here to learn that. So the reality is there's no better coffee craft than Australian coffee craft. And it's an export. People come here to learn. People travel to do coffee crawls in Australia. The idea that somehow we're making that up or it's all marketing just doesn't check out.
I would honestly, if I see an Australian barista anywhere in the world, I just have a level of comfort that I can't even explain. And that's happened to me in New York, in Mexico City, in Barcelona, in London. It's in Paris. And they're valued employees at that places, training other people in the team. On the flavor profile of coffee, like my mum hates lighter roast. She wants that Italian style espresso heart starter. She just knows where to go for it. She's she's quite vicious, actually. It's a one coffee situation. If it doesn't suit, she's moving right on. But there's plenty of places that she can move on to. So as you say, plenty of choice here. All right, Sam, is there anything else that you could say about this argument?
Yeah, well, I think The other one, and I might touch on the Italian one too, because I think that just because you like say a darker roast profile, more developed roast, and you go for those sort of that Maillard reaction, dark shock, nut kind of characteristics, which, like sometimes that's what I feel like. You can also do that badly. And I think that's kind of one of the points I want to touch on. I know some great Australian roasters that prefer that profile and then have great cafes serving it and doing a good job of it. Definitely on average better than my understanding of Italian espresso. I mean, my business partner, who's Italian, literally just got back from Italy last week and almost spat out their good Australian coffee when they read the article, because they were like, every coffee I had in Italy was almost undrinkable. And it's actually, by design. So the Italians invented the espresso machine. They're largely responsible for the Melbourne coffee culture too, and I give them credit for that. Like, we'd be nothing without them, and we stand on shoulders of Italian coffee giants. But, by that logic, England should be winning every football World Cup, but here we are. They're not. You got to move with the times, and other people are doing it better. Hey, then be fighting words, but it's not coming home. Like in Italy, like less than 1% of the coffee they sell in their supermarkets is 100% Arabica. They're generally buying large bulk commodity lots of Robusta and low-grade Arabica from Vietnam, India, and Brazil. Those are facts. You can look them up. It's not my opinion. Specialty cafes make up just a tiny fraction of the Italian coffee space, whereas in Melbourne, it's a huge percentage. And quality is not their aim. It's about consistency. And so they roast very, very dark. Pretty much all of it tastes the same. They don't have to buy really high quality beans. That's just how they've kind of built their system. Whereas in Melbourne, we've got diversity. And I think that's a massive strength. But the reality is, if you're going to, on average, help yourself to a great cup of coffee, you're far more likely to be able to do that in Melbourne. If you want a consistent cup of coffee that, in my opinion, is consistently pretty poor, you'll probably get that in Italy.
But I would say also in Australia, you can get a consistent coffee if you find a coffee that you like. I think from day to day, it'll be made consistently, unless of course, they're talking about a different bean that they've got in and a different roasting profile. So I guess in some cases, you love the adventure of coffee as well. It's not just about throwing it back and getting on your Vespa and going out to Menegilda Zegna or whatever you're doing in your Italian life. I've had some pretty bad coffee throughout Europe, I've got to say. It's not just Italy.
Yeah. No, and I think it's a bit like you're in Italy, of course, the coffee's going to taste better. Like that's in weirdly, the journalist has sort of honed in on something that hospitality owners have been kind of working on for ages, which is that like setting sometimes trumps sensory. Like if you are sitting, on a beautiful boulevard in Tuscany, looking out over vineyards and sipping your horrible over-extracted burnt Italian espresso, you know what? It might even taste good to me, because I'd be pretty happy. It's the same with apparently in Cuba, most of their cigars they export, but I bet, people who've gone there are like, oh, this is the best Cuban I've ever had. It was probably imported from Nicaragua. There's obviously a kind of like setting is so important to the way you experience things. And, maybe James just had a fantastic Italian holiday and it made everything taste cherry ripe. But weirdly, he's just kind of, maybe he's more hospo than he realizes. I don't know.
What else have you got, Sam?
So the other one, and this was probably the one that frustrated me the most, was this idea that the $6 Australian coffee, that was the price I think he pulled out, was a ripoff. And it's just the one that was the most factually wrong. And I could rattle on forever, but I'll start with a couple of things. Firstly, $6 coffee in Australia is manifestly cheaper than it probably should be if you compare us to our most comparable sort of economic neighbours. So if you look at the US, UK, most of Western Europe, even the Middle East, they're all paying close to 25 to 50% more for coffee than us. Some of them are paying double. We're 30th in the world. But if you look at all of those economies I just mentioned, they're all kind of at the top of the most expensive coffee rankings. Italy indeed is a lot cheaper. It's sitting down at about 82nd on that list, but its neighbours are Pakistan and Bangladesh, who you can imagine probably have much, weaker economic conditions and potentially a lot cheaper labour. And so Italy's sitting alongside those, which tells me one thing, that they're probably subsidizing the price for a reason other than what it actually needs to cost. Even Brazil was charging more for a cup of coffee than Italy, and it produces 2/3 of the world's coffee. And you'd think would have, the biggest ability to subsidize its cup price, and yet it's charging more than Italy. So if we can accept that Australia actually has quite cheap coffee for what it's producing, we could unpack how $6 is even, like covering the cost. So coffee's, we did the sums, and if you're doing a single shot rather than a double shot, the coffee is probably the 5th most expensive thing going into a cup. Milk is quite possibly more expensive. Labor is a huge component and definitely the highest cost in most cups of coffee. Rent's probably more expensive if you throw in, the other kind of operating costs of the business. And even GST, we found, came out thereabouts the same, if not more, than the coffee component. And so I think that like people focus on coffee as sort of the coffee cost is the key thing, but it's actually probably everything else in Australia. I mean, our baristas would be paid more than 3 times that of their Italian counterparts. But our rents are among the highest in the world. There's so many reasons why it's a lot more expensive to produce coffee in Australia than it is, in Italy. But then there it is in other economies. And so I think one thing people always sort of point to is how cheap coffee as a raw ingredient, as a component of a latte is, to why they should open a cafe and just print money. Like so many people who are outside the industry are like, oh mate, the markup on coffee is so good. You guys must be doing so well. And I'm like, yeah, the markup on coffee is pretty excellent. But I'm not worried about coffee price that much. Yeah.
Well, I mean, what about the actual coffee price, Sam? Because, coffee's grown somewhere. People grow it. People pick it. People process it. There's a long supply chain. How much do you think people should be thinking about that, about the people that at the very beginning of the supply chain?
Yeah, and that was where I deviated from my normal Panici's wrong about all of his opinions in this particular article. He sort of brought up that he thought marketing spivs were pulling the wool over our eyes when it came to our coffee industry. And I sort of did the reverse and was like, I actually agree with him. But it's not what he said. He was saying they were tricking us into thinking our coffee is good. And I'm saying, no, I think our coffee is good. However, I do think that there's a lot of marketing starting to emerge now that's sort of telling us that our coffee is good and we're paying enough for it and nothing needs to change. And we've got a lot of bigger roasters, I think, that maybe started off as sort of independent specialty roasters who are now kind of moving into that consolidation phase. Maybe they're getting bought out by multinationals and, they're kind of growing up and becoming corporate. But they're still telling the same story that, we're sourcing directly and we're doing this and that. But what I found that if we keep the ceiling of coffee low, if we're charging $6 or less, or if we're kind of pushing, like you've got some big corporations that they're selling like sort of $2-3 coffees, all of a sudden the price of coffee sort of becomes the only flexible thing. You can't really change what you pay people. Australia, like has a minimum wage and that's the minimum. You can't go lower. Our rents aren't really getting cheaper. All of the other costs that our businesses are experiencing are sort of inflexible or going up. And so if you get to the point where we have no room to move and no way to charge more, coffee becomes the only lever to pull, because we have been buying better coffee, but we can always buy cheaper and worse coffee. And I think what's starting to happen is we see these roasting companies subsidizing their values for high quality, coffee that serves the farmer with the commodity sort of stuff that you're more familiar with on the Italian bars. And that means that the farmer is exposed. Either they no longer have a market to sell their coffee, or they're being forced to sell their coffee cheaper. And the impact of that is profound, because for a lot of smallholder farmers, the ones that we kind of enjoy working with at Commonfolk, coffee's their only cash crop. And so they don't have a lot of options, and they don't have a lot of pushback. And so it kind of is, the onus is on the exporter, importer and roaster to make a positive decision to buy coffee at the price that it needs to be charged at, for the farmer to not just be successful for that season, but to have some autonomy and control over what they do, for the following year. And that's just not happening. And for so long, coffee's been super, super cheap, and we've seen a spike, but it's kind of it's coming back, and I do fear that although in theory it's good for roasters like Commonfolk, it could be really, really bad for the industry more broadly.
Well, I think in the price of coffee going up doesn't necessarily mean that farmers are getting some of that increase. Sam, tell us a story about a coffee farmer that you know. You know, what sort of impact can a rise in sales, a rise in price that they're paid, or conversely, a downturn, either in sales or price or both, what sort of impact can that have? Like, tell us about a person.
Yeah, no, yeah, great. I'll try and give a real quick sort of expose on how coffee is sold first, so that you listeners can get a bit of context if they don't know. So at the moment, commodity coffee is sold in futures contracts. So the price is set on the New York Stock Exchange. It's called the C market, and it's typically hovered around sort of like $2 for the good part of 40, 50 years. It's dropped as low as under $1. I think it was 89 cents. At some point when we'd started Commonfolk, and more recently it's got as high as just over $4 US a pound, and so that's for a raw product, and it's largely driven by the Brazilian coffee crop, Arabica coffee crop, because they produce 2/3 of the world's coffee. If they have a great year or a bad year, it pushes the price up or down. The problem is that a lot of coffee farmers who are producing specialty Arabica coffee are doing so on sort of smallholder farms. So I think it's generally termed as being sort of under 20 hectares. But for a lot of the farmers we might work with in Uganda or Kenya or Tanzania, we're talking like literally 1,000 square meters. They might have a garden where they produce some coffee. And you can imagine they can't obviously send an entire container of their coffee overseas. They don't produce that much, which means that they're exposed to the market price. Unless someone like a Commonfolk or an exporter wants to go and work with them directly and talk to them about what price they need to set to make money. And so a positive story is that the last couple of years when the price has skyrocketed, and that's when we've started hearing stories of the mythical $12 latte making an appearance, which it still doesn't appear to have done, is because the coffee price doubled. So some journalist was like, oh, well, coffee's $6 now. So if the coffee price has doubled, it'll be 12. We've just talked about the economics of a cup. That's probably not what's going to happen because coffee is a minor part of that. But what does happen is that rising tide floats all boats. And so at a producer level, the farmer who used to be getting a price that was sort of derived on what the Brazilian market is doing, all of a sudden just got a pay increase through no fault of their own. And so for a lot of farmers who had historically been producing coffee at pretty much cost of production, or with wafer thin margins, could continue producing coffee at a similar cost, but we're actually getting paid a lot more for it. And so in particular with Uganda, where we've been working with a project we helped start in 2015 called Zakukabora, all of their farmers were getting a high price from anyone on the mountain who was buying their coffee, not just from our co-op, Zakuka. Everyone was paying high because they had to compete with the actual commodity market. And so we saw farmers saying, oh, for the first time ever, I'm saving money. This will sustain me for the whole year. I won't have to go and find other employment or try and sell other things. And I mean, we're talking about the poorest of the poor. Often these people don't really have any other income but for their coffee. And the smiles I saw on the faces of these farmers this year, it was like nothing I've seen before because, there was just like, they saw hope. The problem for me is that, a lot of these farmers are like, oh, maybe this will be how it is from now on. Whereas I'm really acutely aware that if Brazil has a bumper crop, which it looks like it may this year, the price is going to go back down. So at the moment, I think the coffee price is, I have it always in front of me on my phone. It's sitting at $3.18 US a pound, which is about $1 less than it was, I think, the same time last year. And that's going to come straight off the bottom line for the farmers. Obviously, the importers, the exporters, the roasters, none of them are going to take the hit. They're going to push it down the value chain. But the cost of my Ugandan farming partner is exactly the same as it was last year. They're just going to take $1 less. And if we want to stop buying good coffee because it's getting too expensive, and by good coffee, I mean the coffee that us Melburnians and us Australians are currently familiar with drinking, specialty coffee. If we don't want to pay the prices as they continue to go up, we'll just start drinking commodity coffee and we'll just start drinking worse coffee until Panici has his wish and we're all drinking Italian-style commodity coffee because it's the only coffee that anyone's buying.
One of the things that's really stood out for me when thinking about this is that when someone sources directly from a grower and gives them the price that they need to be profitable and to continue farming, that it can also be part of a partnership, which means they can farm better. So they can farm using fewer chemical inputs, for example, or they can think more about the soil, or they have time to pick their coffee when it's all perfectly ready to be picked. They're not picking too early just to get it on sale. That there are these sort of flow-on impacts, and of course, in terms of income, maybe their kids stay at school longer, whatever it is. What about that side of it? Do you think that as consumers so far away from Uganda or Brazil here in Australia, is it worth us thinking about those kinds of things?
I think about this a lot because that's sort of, being so close to these people, calling a lot of them my, they're not just partners, they're my friends. I go to their weddings, funerals, kids' birthdays when I get the chance. I see it on a personal level. And so I think too often I speak about it on a personal level, but I get that for the person drinking a cup of coffee in a Commonfolk cafe or any cafe, it's pretty hard, even if they want to, for them to embrace that at the level that I can. And so I've sort of been thinking this year of reframing it more. I think possibly what's more important is to understand that this person, this coffee farmer, this producer, if they're paid more, they're going to be able to produce better coffee. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, how do I know that for sure? And I guess the answer is like, well, you don't, and things change and it's a bit more complicated than that. But on average, what we've seen is that the producers that we've started working with and have done so for many, many years, and there's other importers and exporters, I should say, who do very similar things that we're really proud of. Guys like Caravella and Aceto, Minas Hill, like these are people who are actually bringing coffee for us because we've decided, well, there's no point us doing it. They're better at it than us, and we'll find our partners and then we'll get them to export it. But these companies are trying to back resource farmers to improve their coffee quality, and a big part of that is paying more. And it is happening. It's working. So, Sakuka Bora, which is again my pet project, and I'll wax lyrical about it to no end. When they started, their coffee was pretty poor. And we brought it over, a very small amount of it, and used it. But most of it we sort of felt we had to blend into some kind of more standard sort of coffee products. And I think a lot of the time we were drinking it and celebrating it for what it could be, not what it currently was. But every season since then, it has dramatically improved because there's been this back and forth between us and them, this understanding and trust that we will come and partner with them and pay them what they need no matter what. And their end of the bargain was to be open to improvement and trying new things, so long as we were going to be there to, kind of hold their hand. And that's happened. And so I was lucky enough, we've just got the fresh crop has arrived from them and we were cupping it, sampling it yesterday. And I was blown away. We were trialing it against other, like established specialty Colombian producers, Guatemalan, Costa Rican, Panamanian coffees that we know are really, really high quality. And the Ugandans all held up. And that's been, I think, 11 years since first harvest. And so the proof's in the cup. And if we pay good prices and remain open and kind of do repeat business with the same farmers, you end up getting better and better coffee. And it actually scales to be better value coffee too. So although we're paying them, more than the commodity rate, we're probably not necessarily paying for how much better the coffee now is. We've incrementally increased what we pay, but the quality is sort of, gone even beyond that. And so for us, we've just been blown away. In fact, one of those coffees won the Victorian Brewers Cup last year. And we think that there's some coffees that they're bringing in that are probably even better. And that's just because we kind of put our money where our mouth is and kept buying the same coffee. And it's worth it for the customer because now they get to drink it.
I mean, I like this idea of talking about the better coffee, but I find it a bit sad to not connect it to the people. Like, what difference has it made to lives over there because of the continued or the consistent investment that you've made in their coffee and in the improvement of it?
Yeah. So for Zakuka again, and I'll just use those guys because I think they're the best example. There was sort of zero, I guess, ongoing meaningful employment in the Wenale region of Mount Elgon, which is where Zakuka's home base is. And when they started, they could then employ a couple of locals who, were learning on the job in a way. They were connected to the coffee industry, but they had to modernize and do these different things. Now we're talking about, I think it's about 30 to 40 full-time employees who are employed all year at what is considered pretty good Ugandan wages, probably better than the average, who are now all experts in coffee and who have then also developed other both soft and hard skills centered around not just coffee, but business, economics of import, export, and management and leadership. I look at one of the guys, Isaac, who's the head of sort of quality, and he's like kind of the field officer for Zakuka. He was a bit of a social outcast. He'd been thrown out of his community because I think he converted from Islam to Christianity, and had to rebuild himself from the ground up. Hadn't had, I think, specific formal training in and around different things, but what he did have was these deep connections with people, and also, a no bullshit meter like you've never seen. And so he wouldn't get taken advantage of when people were negotiating price or trying to, kind of give them lower quality coffee than they were demanding. And now he's built himself into, this, I guess, a leader in what is high quality Ugandan coffee. And he's kind of processing the entire Zakuka crop, which has gone from being, 4 tons to, they think they can do over 100. And he's done that from having zero employment and being ostracized by his community. And now he owns a house in town. He has a wife and children. He's developed his education and skill. And he's just one of 40. And then there's another 200 odd people who are employed during the season who now have an income. A lot of women who traditionally would probably struggle to get any sort of paid work. Zakuka makes a specific effort to employ them and to give them work and leadership positions so that they don't have to depend on their husbands and the domestic situation, which can sometimes not be ideal. And then they can have that money for themselves. The scale of which too, all from us just buying maybe 1 container of coffee a year, has transformed an entire region of the mountain. And the lives of, I think there's about 20,000 people directly impacted by Zakuka Bora now operating in that space, be it the communities that this coffee is being produced in. And they're real people. And if we didn't do it, it would be back where it was originally with none of that.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it, Sam. It's real people, real stories. Like, go Isaac. It's, I love hearing that. And I think, what we miss out on when we, get commodity coffee dark roasted to a standard that gives us a consistent, homogenous, anonymous product. You miss out on that connection, that differentiation, that seasonal change. All those little moments that we can celebrate. Yeah, that's great. Like, I'll pay more for the story than the better coffee, honestly. I also want to give a shout out to milk, because you mentioned that as it's a large portion of the cost of a cup. And I was listening to a Queensland farmer a couple of days ago, and he told me that when he was little, there were 55,000 dairy farmers in Queensland. Now there are about 200. That is just a staggering statistic. I think not trying to make a pun, but the homogenization of the dairy industry is to our shame, honestly, as Australians. And this is a product that we do have control over. We are close to it. We are, within a couple of hours of our cities of dairy farmers, and dairy farmers who are often doing it really, really tough. What are some of the things that you'd like us to think about when we think about milk?
Oh, yeah. And this is the thing, isn't it? There's so many moving parts. I feel like, if anything, hospitality and let's say coffee can be just this beacon to have these conversations, because we do care so much about it, and it's so personal, and people get so passionate about it and pissed off, be it this and that. And yeah, milk again. I think that I mean, we have a bit of a duopoly in Australia, that has maybe a similar impact on our dairy that the Brazilian coffee, Arabica coffee market has on global coffee. And it means that consolidation is sort of the order of the day. And that's happening to milk. It would be nigh on impossible, I think, for a dairy farmer to operate at a large scale and not be affiliated directly with, a large multinational. I don't profess to know deeply the inner workings of that, other than that, most of the dairy farms that I know are either super small and trying to be that niche kind of like a specialty offering, but can't really play in any sort of large commercial field, or they have to have a contract with, with Monsanto or Puro, whoever it is. I don't know who owns these companies, but and they have to kind of service Coles and Woolworths at the price that's dictated to them. And I would say it's near impossible, and that's why we're seeing consolidation. And it brings us back to that point we mentioned before, Dani, that's sort of the world that 2026 is presenting us with, is that as things get tougher, these big corporations are going to see cost pressure as an opportunity to consolidate, because oftentimes they'll lost lead on things for ages, knowing that their competitors, the small guys, won't be able to compete. And eventually they're going to have to either shut up shop, or they're going to have to sell at cutthroat prices to these big businesses. And we're going to see the loss of the independent small business in Australia on a level like we've never seen before. And again, I'm not in power. I don't profess to be a politician and know the levers we should pull, but I'd like to think that someone listening would recognize this, the alarm bells are ringing, and find a way to, I'm not saying taxpayers should subsidize these small businesses, but maybe like offer some relief, and maybe not expect them to bear the same burden that these big corporations are, and ditto with the dairy farmers and just anyone involved in this space, because pretty soon they won't be. And if everyone wants to just work for big corporate conglomerate, then fantastic. I mean, again, I think AI is sort of like shining a spotlight on this too. We realize that we're sort of at the whims of Silicon Valley tech bros, and there's talk of like data centers popping up next to primary schools and stuff. But the same thing sort of happening, with a rug pull underneath our hospitality industry, but for other reasons. We can't really, we can't compete with them if we don't get help from people who actually do hold the power, I think is probably the big kicker.
Yeah, and I don't even know if help is the right way to frame it, Sam, because it's about making decisions about the kind of society we want to live in. And we can do that at every level. We can do that locally. We can do that with our spending power internationally, or, the kinds of programs that you run in Uganda, and the kind of decisions that you make as a business person who's sourcing internationally. So, yeah, it's not about handouts. It's about choices. And yeah, there are so many different levers that can be pulled. It can seem like a very overwhelming world when you talk about all this stuff, but I would say if we bring it back down to a cup of coffee, and you've spoken about the $6 coffee. I think so many cafes would just love to charge $6 for a coffee, because they're certainly not. But I think if what I would take away from what you've said, just without the morning cup of coffee that I need to get up and do this podcast, it would be I will support people who are making careful choices about where they source their products from, and I will be happy to support them with my dollars.
Yeah, and if that's the only takeaway, I think I get that everyone's feeling the pinch, and I tell my team all the time that like all I want to be able to do is offer value to our customers. Like I don't want to preach that like you're not paying enough, like too hard, because like I also get that like we actually, a lot of our customers are the hospo people. Like we all get it. Everyone's sort of in the same boat. But my encouragement is that if you can and when you can, even if it becomes a bit of a luxury rather than a daily ritual, is to choose to purchase from, independent businesses and businesses trying to do good things. If you can't afford to go out to a cafe every day and grab a coffee, when you do, make sure you go to a good independently owned one. But if you're going to drink coffee at home, like, can you not buy from the supermarket? Like there's a local roaster in pretty much every suburb these days, especially in Victoria. Like go and buy from them. The price difference in that one cup of coffee you're going to brew from is pretty negligible. And so I just think that there's so many things we can do that can still help. And I agree, it's not about it's not about handouts and help. And it's a choice about, what do we want and not want to be? And I don't think anyone wants Macca's to be the only place they can go and get a coffee from. But that's what you get if we don't make conscious, kind of positive decisions to not make that a reality. And we kind of all get to do that. And if we all did it just a little bit, it'd be fine. But I'd say the last thing that we need is more of these articles saying that coffee in Australia is overpriced and shit.
Yeah, it's not. Sam, thank you for rebutting the article, which will remain nameless and probably unlinked. But I don't know, maybe I should put it there just so people can see what. But I don't think I need to.
How much trouble would you get in if you just copy and pasted the text?
Interesting. Yes, I'll think about that. But Sam, thanks so much for coming on for a chat. It's really fantastic to have your perspective on dirty linen.
Thank you so much, Dani. It's been a pleasure.
This is Dirty Linen. I'm Dani Valent. We bring you untold stories from the food world. Real, raw, unafraid, hopeful. We're driven by a belief that food provides endless opportunities for learning, connecting, and creating the world we want to live in. Delicious, open-hearted, meaningful. If you know a story that needs telling, get in touch. Write to dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au. Thank you for listening.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.